You've probably heard the name, the Waqf Board, right? It pops up in the headlines all the time, usually tied to stories about land, law, and some pretty big controversies. But what is it really? We're going to break down one of India's most powerful and honestly, least understood institutions. So, to get a sense of just how big this is, let's put it in perspective. After Indian Railways and the Defense Department, the Waqf Boards, altogether, are often called the third largest landowner in the entire country. They control massive, massive amounts of land. The big question is, how on earth did that happen?
And look, it's not just about the sheer size of the land, it's the value. Way back in 2006, a government committee put the market value of these properties at a mind-boggling 1.2 lakh crore rupees. Can you even imagine what that number would be today? We're talking about absolutely astronomical financial stakes.
Okay, let's get into it. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll cover what Waqf even means. Then we'll trace its long history here in India, unpack the laws that give the board all its power, dive into the decades of controversy, and finally, we'll look at the huge changes being proposed right now in 2024.
So before we can even begin to talk about the laws and all the drama, we have to go right back to the very beginning. What is Waqf at its core? It's not just a word, it's an ancient idea, and it's rooted in this really powerful principle of faith and charity that lasts forever.
At the absolute heart of it all is this concept, sadaqah-e-jariyah. It means continuous charity. Think of it like a charitable gift that's designed to keep on giving. It creates these ripples through time where the benefits and the spiritual rewards for the donor just continue to flow long, long after they're gone.
And that whole idea is built on three simple but absolutely unshakable principles. Number one, the property is dedicated to God. Ownership is permanently handed over. Number two, it is totally irrevocable. You can't sell it, you can't gift it, you can't inherit it, and the donor can never ever take it back. And number three, its benefits have to be used for the public good, for religious or charitable causes like helping the poor, running schools, or maintaining mosques.
All right, so how did this ancient religious idea transform into this massive, formal legal institution we see in India today? Well, it's a journey that spans empires from the Mughals through the British Raj and right into the modern Indian state.
You know, this didn't happen overnight. It was a centuries-long process. It all started back in the Mughal era when rulers would attach land grants to mosques and shrines to make sure they could support themselves forever. Then, the British came along and started to formalize it with laws, like the 1923 Act. After independence, the Indian government created state-level boards with the 1954 Act. But the real game changer? That was the 1995 Act. It basically supercharged the board's power by creating special courts or tribunals just to handle Waqf disputes.
So yeah, those laws, especially the ones passed after independence, they are the engine that created the Waqf Board as we know it today. And they didn't just create some simple administrative body. They gave it some really significant and often very controversial powers. So what can they actually do? Well, the scope is huge. The boards can survey land, they can identify what they believe is Waqfish property, and then, with just a notification, they can officially declare it as Waqfish. They manage these assets, they can lease them out, and here's a really critical detail. Disputes don't go to regular courts. They go to those special Waqfish tribunals. Plus, the 1995 Act flipped the burden of proof on its head. That means if the board lays a claim to your land, it's often on you to prove it's yours, not the other way around.
And this right here is the fundamental legal principle that underpins everything, and it's been upheld by India's Supreme Court. Once a Waqf, always a Waqf. It means that once a property is declared to be a Waqf, that's it. Its status is permanent. It's inalienable for all time. It can't be sold or go back to being private property. Legally and spiritually, it is forever a Waqf. Now, you can probably guess what happens when you combine vast amounts of land with these kinds of sweeping legal powers. Unsurprisingly, it has led to decades of really intense controversy. The story of the Waqf Board is, unfortunately, also a story of staggering mismanagement and, yes, corruption allegations. If you want to understand the sheer scale of this problem, just look at this number. It's from the government's own Sachar Committee report. It estimated that Waqf properties had the potential to bring in 12,000 crore rupees every single year, and the actual income they were collecting? Just 163 crores.
Let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a return of just over 1%. I mean, just look at that gap. It's enormous. It pointed to deep, systemic problems in how these incredibly valuable assets were being handled.
And those problems have names. Reports over the years have documented a pretty consistent pattern of allegations. We're talking about caretakers, or mutawalis, allegedly working with others to illegally sell off land. Prime properties in the middle of cities being leased out for pennies, political interference, messy rent collection, and even faked records. There was even a case of a lease being granted to an alcohol company, which goes against the very principles of Waqf.
Okay, so that brings us right up to the present day. In 2024, the central government introduced a new bill that aims to completely overhaul the Waqf Act. This is one of the biggest attempts to reform this system in its entire history.
And the proposed changes are huge. They touch almost every part of the board's power. First off, the authority to survey and identify Waqf land, that would move from a Waqf commissioner to the government's district collector. Second, that controversial idea of Waqf by user, where land could be claimed just based on being used for a long time, that would be gone. To be a Waqf, you'd need a written, registered deed. The board itself would also change, requiring non-Muslim and women members. And this is a big one. The Limitation Act would now apply, which means there would be a time limit for making new claims on a property.
So what's the big picture here? When you put all these changes together, it represents a massive transfer of authority. The power to identify, manage, and audit these properties would shift pretty significantly away from a body led by the Muslim community and towards the machinery of the state government, officials like the district collector and the comptroller and auditor general, the CAG.
And this brings us to the final, really critical question. The Waqf system is this unique, complex mix of ancient faith, modern law, and enormous property assets. People who support the new bill say it's absolutely necessary for transparency and accountability. But opponents worry that it strips a community of its right to manage its own religious endowments. The whole debate really asks a fundamental question for modern India. How do you balance an ancient concept of faith and charity with the very real demands of modern governance?